Supreme Court and the Fourth Amendment. What this case really means? Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Firearms Rights Advisor. Today's discussion steps slightly outside our usual Second Amendment focus, but it's still directly connected to constitutional rights that affect all of us. We're talking about the Fourth Amendment, specifically the limits on when law enforcement may enter a private home without a warrant. A recent Supreme Court decision has caused concern among many viewers, with some asking whether privacy inside the home has been significantly weakened. There are legitimate questions here, but there's also a lot of misunderstanding. So rather than reacting emotionally, let's walk through the decision carefully and separate what the court actually said from what it did not say. The case at issue originated in Montana and ultimately reached the United States Supreme Court. The court's opinion was relatively short and, importantly, unanimous. All 9 justices agreed on the outcome. The core legal question was straightforward. What level of evidence must police have before entering a home without a warrant when they are responding to a perceived emergency rather than investigating a crime? More specifically, does law enforcement need probable cause, or is a lower standard, known as objective reasonableness, sufficient in emergency situations? Here is a brief summary of the events that gave rise to the case. A man's former partner contacted emergency services after a phone conversation in which she believed he was heavily intoxicated and threatening to harm himself using a firearm. She reported that he owned multiple firearms and that he may have been holding one during the call. She also told authorities that he warned police not to come to the property, allegedly stating that he would shoot officers if they arrived. Officers responded to the residence. From outside the home, they observed an empty handgun holster and a handwritten note that raised concerns about possible self-harm. Despite repeated attempts to make contact, no one answered the door. At this point, officers were not investigating a crime. They were responding to what they believed was a potential medical or mental health emergency, often referred to as a community caretaking or emergency aid function. Officers entered the home. During a search, an encounter occurred in which the homeowner unexpectedly emerged from a closet. Believing he was armed, an officer fired, injuring him. A firearm was later recovered nearby. The homeowner was later charged with crimes related to the encounter and moved to suppress all evidence, arguing that the officer's warrantless entry violated the Fourth Amendment. His argument was that because officers lacked probable cause, their entry was unlawful, and everything that followed should be excluded as unconstitutional. Lower courts rejected this argument, and the case ultimately reached the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court upheld the conviction. However, while it agreed with the outcome reached by the Montana courts, it clarified the legal reasoning. The court relied heavily on prior precedent, particularly a 2006 decision holding that police may enter a home without a warrant if they have an objectively reasonable basis to believe that someone inside is seriously injured or facing an immediate threat. The court rejected the argument that probable cause is required in emergency, non-criminal situations. Probable cause, the court explained, is a standard tied to criminal investigations and does not neatly apply to emergency aid scenarios. In simple terms, when police are responding to a genuine emergency, not gathering evidence of a crime, the Constitution does not require the same level of proof as it does for a criminal search. As a result of this decision, the governing rule is clear and consistent with prior case law. Police may enter a home without a warrant if they have an objectively reasonable belief that someone inside needs immediate emergency assistance. They do not need probable cause in that specific context. This decision did not create a new rule. It reaffirmed an existing one. Many people are uneasy with the phrase objectively reasonable belief, and that concern is understandable. Unlike probable cause, which has a long and structured body of case law behind it, objective reasonableness can appear less precise. Critics argue that it creates room for inconsistent application and potential abuse. There is also a broader concern that the Fourth Amendment, as originally understood, has been gradually narrowed through decades of exceptions to the warrant requirement. Additionally, mental health professionals have raised concerns that law enforcement officers are often placed in situations involving psychological crises without specialized training, sometimes with tragic outcomes. It's important to understand that this decision did not represent a sudden loss of Fourth Amendment protections. The most significant shift in this area occurred years ago with earlier Supreme Court rulings. This case simply reaffirmed that framework. That does not mean concerns about abuse are unfounded. It does mean, however, that the legal landscape did not fundamentally change as a result of this ruling. As always, understanding how constitutional rights are interpreted and how they evolve over time is an essential part of being an informed and responsible citizen. And remember, knowing the law is just as important as exercising your rights. Thanks for watching Firearms Rights Advisor. Stay informed, stay safe.